Shalom. My name is Frank Hartman from Biblical Mastery Academy. I want to share with you today 3 hacks that will help you as you memorize biblical Hebrew vocabulary and to help it stick. One of the things that my students continually respond to me with is that they encounter difficulty memorizing their biblical Hebrew vocabulary because there's just no context. If it's just in a list of words, the foreign script and the unassociated words just seem to float away in their memory. And that's expected because it's pretty well known that as we memorize vocabulary in any language, modern or ancient, unless we have something to anchor it to in our memories, it'll just float away. It'll just disappear. So I'd like to offer you today 3 ways or hacks to be able to avoid that and to have those vocabulary words stick in your memory. Now, one of the first things we probably ought to define is, what is a hack? A hack is a shortcut. It is a means through which someone can learn something faster and more effectively. And you've probably seen the term used a lot in learning other things. So today we want to learn 3 hacks that will increase our ability to be able to retain our biblical Hebrew vocabulary as we learn it. So hack number 1 is to sound out the word and then look for an interesting, relevant, amusing phrase that we can memorize along with it. For example, the Hebrew word bakash. It means to seek or to inquire. Well, as we sound out that word, bakash, you can hear that second syllable, cash, and we can use that to help remember the word. The way I've done it in the past is to use that cash to remember that we're seeking or inquiring about cash. A very famous phrase that goes along with that is look for the money, from a movie, right? And that tells me the meaning of the word as well. Another example is the Hebrew word har. It means a hill or a mountain. And to help me remember that word, I've kind of pictured myself before a big hill or especially a mountain where the mountain's looking at me, little small me compared to it, and laughing at me, saying, har, 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 you are so small. I'm a big hill. I'm a big mountain. You are so small. Har, har, har. So you see how sounding out that word has helped me associate that with some funny, amusing, or relevant picture in my mind, and that helps me remember the meaning of the vocabulary word. So hack number 2 is to take that Hebrew vocabulary word that you're trying to memorize and transliterate that word using letters in your own native language, and then make an association based on those letters. So to transliterate, we just do that letter by letter, taking the Hebrew letters, turning it into the native letters of our language, and then using the result of that to perhaps come up with a reminder. So for example, the Hebrew vocabulary word halak, which means to walk or go, is made up of the Hebrew letters He, Lamed, and Kaf. So if I transliterated that into my native language, English, that would be an H, an L, and a K. Well, if in my language, HLK spells Hulk. And really, since the meaning of halak is to walk or go, that's very close to walk. And so I picture in my head Hulk walk, like the famous line that Hulk uses, Hulk smash. I just changed that to be Hulk walk. And it helps me understand that halach means to walk or go. So that association helps that vocabulary word stick in my mind. Another example is the Hebrew word kavar. It means to bury. But it sounds like and is spelled like an English word, if I transliterate the letters, to be the equivalent of CVR, or cover. And I picture in my mind, when something is buried, it is covered. And so kavar I associate with being covered and therefore being buried, and that helps me remember kavar as well. And lastly, hack number 3 is to associate Hebrew vocabulary with Hebrew words I've already come across or I already may know, maybe in a different form, but they're going to sound familiar, and if I just identify those similarities, that will help me associate in my mind the vocabulary with what I already know. For example, many of us are familiar with the word hallelujah in English. Well, the Hebrew word, the verb hallel, means to praise, and it means to lift up. And that's part of what we recognize in the English version, hallelujah. And so that hallelujah begins with the verb hallel. And by associating those two, we can remember hallel, the Hebrew word, because we know the English version, hallelujah. Another example is the Hebrew word for day, or yom. That may sound familiar if you're familiar with the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And that same yom is the Hebrew vocabulary word for day, yom. In fact, the Kippur part we've already covered in the last hack, and that would be a form of the word for burying, to cover, or Kippur. And so Yom Kippur, in a sense, is the day of covering, or the day of atonement. And historically, that's the day where the Jewish community's sins were atoned for or buried and not taken into account by God. So using some modern Hebrew words that you may have come across or may know will help you immensely in memorizing the roots and forms of those words in biblical Hebrew. So to review our 3 hacks, let's remind ourselves that first we can sound out the words and look for amusing or relevant associations that will help those words stick to our memory. We can also transliterate those words into the letters of our native language and then look for a pattern, familiar words or phrases that will again help those words stick to our memory. And finally, we probably don't realize it, but we know a lot more Hebrew words from just our modern culture than we think we do. And when we come across those words in our modern vernacular, we should recognize their roots in biblical Hebrew. And we can then, once again, associate those to stick in our memory. One final association I'd like to leave you with today, and this will be especially relevant if you're a dog lover, is the Hebrew word for dog, kelev. And that word we can easily memorize, get to stick in our memory by associating that with a name that we're very familiar with from the Bible, Caleb. And maybe you know a Caleb in your life today. And that word actually means dog. And so what you do with that and your friend Caleb, I'll leave that up to you. Now, unfortunately, I have bad news for you cat lovers. There is no biblical Hebrew word for cat. We know there was cats. They were in Egypt, but we don't have any record of what the word is that the ancient Israelites used to describe a cat. So, unfortunately, there's no word for cat for you to be able to memorize in biblical Hebrew. Well, thank you very much for watching our video here today. I hope this has been helpful to you, especially if you are in the process of learning biblical Hebrew and you've been stuck on how do I improve my ability or reduce my time in learning biblical Hebrew vocabulary. If you have never learned biblical Hebrew vocabulary or biblical Hebrew at all, but you have an interest in being able to read your Hebrew Bible, your Old Testament, in its original language, or maybe you have an interest in reading your New Testament in its original language, Greek, then I encourage you to go to bma.to/starterpack, and you can download information about learning either one of those biblical languages. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Shalom, and I hope to see you again very soon.